Corporations are a bold lot, especially recently when it seems they're not just content to rake in billions of dollars, lobby and manipulate the law, and game the system to avoid paying their fair share like the rest of us, but they have the brass neck to then act like paragons of progressive virtue. We've all seen it. Mr. Billion-dollar corporation gets up on his moral high horse for a sassy marketing campaign, hitching his wagon to whatever hot-button socio-political topic is trending on Twitter that month. Even if you're sympathetic to that particular cause, these corporations joining in always feels very disingenuous. After all, they're only using it as a vehicle to advertise their crap. But if you're like me, you're less interested in a company's carefully engineered public image and more interested in the skeletons in the closet, the things they'd rather you didn't talk about. Today we'll be looking at Fanta, which is owned by the Coca-Cola company and was technically created by them, but under circumstances they'd probably prefer you didn't know. Coca-Cola was created in America in 1886. By the next decade, they were a staple American brand. By the 1920s, they were setting up operations in Europe, slowly expanding the company into the global empire we know today. In 1933, the German branch of the company came under the leadership of a man named Max Keitt. The very same year, another German man would also come to power, although I forget who that was. Let me look it up. Ah yes, his name was Adolf Hitler. As the leader of the Nazi Party, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany in 1933. While Max Keitt was not a member of the Nazi Party, he didn't seem to have a problem with them either, as he attempted to integrate Coca-Cola into the German identity in the same way as had been done in America to great success. Keitt found himself collaborating with the Nazi government to promote Coke. The company sponsored the 1936 Berlin Olympics, with the Coca-Cola logo flying happily alongside the swastika. At the celebration of Coke's 10th anniversary in Germany, Keitt organised a mass Sieg Heil in honour of Hitler's 50th birthday. As Hitler began ramping up for war, Germany started to come down on foreign businesses, some being outright seized by the government. Keitt's Coca-Cola was safe from this. After all, it was an American company, and Germany wasn't at war with America. Yet. So what did Coca-Cola HQ back in America make of all this Nazi stuff? What was their stance on Germany's invasions? Well, no stance really. Export of the secret Coke syrup formula continued as usual, although the war made it hard to obtain the key ingredients in Germany, halting production. And by 1941 the US would enter the war and their trade embargoes forbade Coca-Cola from exporting their syrup to the enemy. This left Max Keitt in a bit of a predicament. He was the head of Germany's Coca-Cola, and he couldn't make Coca-Cola. That's like running a McDonald's with no access to cow rectums. How the fuck are you going to make the burgers? Keitt wasn't going to give up on the company so easily though. If he couldn't make American Coke, he'd just have to make Nazi Coke. Making a whole new formula was going to be difficult with wartime rationing though. The best Keitt could get his hands on was the scraps left by the food industry. Essentially, waste. Things like leftover fruit pulp from cider pressing, and whey, the liquid remains of cheese curdling. This new beverage was made from the leftovers of the leftovers, but it was the best they could do given the circumstances. It certainly wasn't Coke though, so they'd have to come up with a new name for this drink. After some time unsuccessfully brainstorming with his team, Keitt implored them to use their imagination, or in German, ihre Fantasie, prompting a salesman to utter Fanta. With that, the drink had its name. The other suggestions must have been fucking shocking if that was the best one, but I suppose that's what happens when you ask the Germans to use their imagination. Nothing good will come of it. Fanta became a big success in Germany. It basically became Germany's soft drink, as there were few alternatives. Keitt was allowed some leniency when it came to the sugar rationing at the time, meaning Fanta was one of the sweetest things on the market. As such, Germans would buy Fanta not just to drink, but to add to their cooking as well. Christ almighty, I'd say that was rank. But Keit's favour within the Third Reich didn't end at rationing exemptions. He was appointed to the government's Office of Enemy Property, which meant he gained control of the Coca-Cola plants in the countries Germany was taking over as well. Fanta thus spread across Europe. They had joy, they had fun, they had seasons in the sun, but the Nazis' time in the sun wouldn't last forever, and with their defeat at the end of the war, Max Keitt was once again in a predicament. He had basically been running a completely separate company to America's Coca-Cola, so was this just his his company now, or would the Americans take it all over and kick his ass out? Well, like most successful businessmen, Kite was happy enough to jump on board with whatever the prevailing ideology was at the time, whether it be the Third Reich or the Allies who had just defeated his country. Max Kite handed over all the money made during the war to the American Coca-Cola, and his European branches were reunited with the parent company. Coca-Cola was very grateful to Kite for keeping the company afloat in times of crisis, and they rewarded him for his efforts by giving him command of Coca-Cola Europe. With Coke back on the market, Fanta disappeared. It was only in 1955 that Coca-Cola reintroduced Fanta with a new orange-flavoured recipe, in response to Pepsi-Cola's launching of several new soft drinks. At this point, Pepsi is probably the most recurring character in my videos. Obviously, today Fanta is hugely popular, although the Coca-Cola company would probably prefer if you didn't know about its origins as a drink made of food scraps because the Nazis couldn't have Coke. Which is why it's quite surprising that in 2015 they celebrated the 75th anniversary of Fanta in Germany, with a vintage bottle design and authentic wartime flavour. That seems like a bit of a misstep. I can't imagine Volkswagen doing a re-release of the fucking Kubelwagen. Forget I said that. You might be saying, come on, Kookser, they shouldn't have to hide the circumstances of the drink's creation. They didn't do anything wrong. And that's fair enough. But, well, to advertise the vintage Fanta, Coke said they were bringing back the feeling of the good old times. The good old times. Because when I think of the good old times, this is what I think of. As you can imagine, there was some backlash against this, and Coke replaced the ad and apologised, with the representatives saying the 75-year-old brand had no association with Hitler or the Nazi Party. I mean, yeah, it's not like Hitler himself ordered the creation of the drink, but to say there was no association with the Nazis isn't entirely accurate, is it? So keep this story in mind if Coke tries its hand on the old corporate high horse anytime soon. And if you're sick of all these bastards and are looking for a brand that isn't going to get all hypocritically sanctimonious on you, well, you've come to the wrong place, to be honest. But at least I'm usually being facetious when I'm a prick. So if you can appreciate that, give us a subscribe and watch more of my videos if you liked this one. And if you didn't, I got 2 words for you. Stay safe.